Cool. Hello, everybody. Welcome to those that are joining by streaming, and hello again to the delegates. I'm Avi Freedman. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Kentik, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our roadmap. We talked a little bit about Kentik overall, the structure of the system, went into interconnection that's critical for service providers and those looking to do edge and interconnectivity. A little bit about the service provider functionality. After this section, we'll talk about our cloud functionality. But now I'll talk a little bit about our roadmap, where we're going as a company. So first I'll start with a section that's been popular, is what are we not trying to do? We are not trying today to be the one place for service health, understanding all the dependencies all the way down into some of the more advanced enterprise workflows, some of the more advanced service provider workflows. We generally work with those systems. So we're feeding them deep insights about the infrastructure, applications, users, but we're not looking over to every element and bringing that back up. We generally work with those systems. Config validations, you all heard from Forward Networks earlier today. We look at things like Forward and Batfish, which is an open source, and say over time when we see them more in our customers, how do we integrate with those things to bring in traffic to fit into CI/CD? People use us via our API, but we're not trying to be the master system, although we are going to take configs for validation, correlation, and looking at them. APM, we're not trying to be an APM player, but we do want to connect to those layers. We're also not trying to do everything in logging or BI. There's some great systems like packet design for looking at IGP. Again, we do look at routing, but we're not trying to do OSPF, debugging, things like that. We're not trying to be security and patch management. So there's a lot of things in the monitoring space that we view as outside our scope. We say short term, sort of medium term over the next year, these are the things that we're not thinking about doing. So how do we think about taking V4, which is a quarter old, and extending it? We showed you some physical topology, and we're going to show you some of the cloud data that we have, but bringing it all together in one overall view of the actual topology, and then actually even including some of the application metrics and topology as well. So one view from top down all the way into whether it's a data center or your WAN or your cloud infrastructure, all in one place, bringing that together. Additional metrics, so right now we do take device telemetry as an authoritative repository, but over time we get asked to be that system, not just for IFMIB, CPU temperature, device health, but for everything, all the way to something like what a SEV1 does, or raise your hand if you're still using MRTG. Anybody? Okay. So MRTG, Cacti, Observium, and all that. And we already do streaming telemetry and SNMP, and then device APIs and CLI, bringing all that together. And I'll talk a little bit about that because I think it's a grand challenge for all the hype about streaming telemetry, but how do you pull all this together? And then new insights, new workflows. At the end, if we have time, again, I'll ask you for product feedback. What are the things that people do that are repetitive? That's what we want feedback about, and that's how we prioritize. And then we're not trying to be the config management system, the IGP deep debugging system today, or the syslogging system to replace Splunk or Elastic, but we want to have visibility into that, so as we do insights, we can say, oh yeah, and we saw the number of routes changed, but here was the BGP error, and pull all those things together. And then integrations, just continue integrations on the operational side, orchestration. And for us in the enterprise, we see a lot of, hey, there's something wrong, and it's not in the network. Can you link over to the APM system, whether that's Dynatrace or in no particular order, or New Relic or Datadog or AppD or whoever people are using, like up the stack beyond some of the host visibility that we can do. So talked just briefly about topology, bringing all that together, data center deep into the different kinds of topologies people have. We have customers that some of them are the web scalers that have 2,000 TORs. And you need to go down to the pixel to show patterns about what's actually going on in that kind of infrastructure. Those are some of the things that are coming. And then additional visualizations for some of the data that we can now get, where people are doing host instrumentation. We can see into the process, into the container, and then map that back to application. So platform-wise, and I'll be talk a little bit about the evolution of that, and it was tweeted a little bit about AI ops, and we can talk a little bit about that too if people have specific questions. But I saw the tweet, and I forget which delegate it was, that talked about our data, and I'll show you some of the other things that we're doing as we think about it. But first, when Gartner started quantifying or really launched AI ops, which used to be called algorithmic operations, we thought it was really interesting because our approach has always been to take multiple kinds of data and try to correlate it and then do anomaly detection. And as we've moved from a more BI sort of tool to workflow tool, we thought it was a really good classification. So the question came up on Twitter, how has this resonated? And the answer is, with executives who are trying to figure out where Kentik fits with their other platforms and other tools, it has worked pretty well. And with practitioners, their main concern is generally, what problems are you solving? How do I audit my bills? How do I make the bad stuff go away? How do I see whether these input errors are a problem? So they generally are not thinking up at this level. And so the way we set the context is, the more data we have, the better insights we can generate, and then bring that back to what we show in the product. So AI ops is a way of framing that tries to help the executives, the tool makers. In service providers, we see people have big data initiatives. In enterprise, we see in centralized IT or line of business sometimes, initiative to connect all the monitoring stacks together, which is still a grand project for a lot of people. So it's a way that we help people think about what we're doing, but we talk much more about the use cases when we actually go in and work with practitioners. But for this to be effective, and really the history of Kentik, we've got more kinds of data that we want to take, and the biggest one that we're heading towards earlier in the year is actually adding performance. So we're adding synthetic monitoring. A lot of our traffic sources of data have performance information, like an ASR 1K can do AVC, and Google VPC flow logs have latency data. But a lot of the data that we get from NetFlow, SFlow, or even Cloud Flow Logs don't have performance data. And so adding synthetic testing, integration with the systems that are out there, we have our own agent, but also you can think of IPSLA or the RIPE measurement network or TWAMP if you have the big 10 gig routers. When we see an IF input error, what are we to do? We can see traffic patterns, but if you're not sending us performance, we want to do synthetic. And then BGP, over time, a lot of our customers ask us for monitoring hijacks and activity in BGP. We take BGP, we have a very traffic central view of that, but over time, we'll be adding more BGP functionality. And then in a correlation way, as I talked about, some of the things, we're not trying to be an APM company or an IGP analytics or a logging company, but the things that are necessary for us to really correlate and look at what's happening on the infrastructure as opposed to some of the other layers, those are the things that we think about. Beyond that, which is, I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but if you just want to think about what we're doing, some of those things we start correlating with become core data sources and workflows that we have. And then we think about other systems like, again, transport down to layer 0, 1, 2, APM, some of the things we'll still think of as correlation. So we think of the framing as the more data, the more food. Anyone remember short circuit? Number 5 is alive. Chrome-breasted input eater. What did short circuit say? Need input. More input. So that's the idea of Kentik, and with modern systems, you don't have to be scared of the volume or the diversity. We can make better decisions when we get that. So I talked about insights. That's really how we think about applying learning, is the telemetry, the device telemetry, the performance telemetry. The more of these sources that we get, the better the insights that we can make. And especially to say, there's an input error, you don't need to do something about it. We're predicting optics failure, the performance is fine. Correlating across these domains. And then integration over time, we actually get to use our customers' behavior to tell us what insights are good or not. That goes into the models to tune parameters and things like that. And then over time, we've got to be privacy respecting, but we actually have, for those that are on our SaaS platform, data across the customers. That'll be more on the cloud, on the performance side than the traffic side to start, but we do have think also about some of what Greg talked about, which is what are the traffic patterns on the network, what's going on. We have customers that are on Slack channels. How do we help people understand global state, router bugs, things that are going on, attacks or performance? Those are things that we think about also. And as part of that, a lot of our community are these software companies. A lot of them have their integrated tooling and work with Kentik. And we get a lot of requests to say, hey, if you're going to put data in Kentik, can you have that be in our system? So as we launch our performance network, we actually want to partner. And we have CDNs as customers, service providers, gaming companies, ad tech companies, people that are being measured. So you'll actually see us open sourcing our performance agent, the ability for people to use that on their own and send it to Influx or Prometheus. One of the things that we think is a big gap in the industry is, I call it a universal metrics translator. It's something that says, here are my devices. Let me take SNMP, streaming telemetry, router, API, CLI, and just measure it the right way, make it available. Right now, if you go to the talks from the major vendors, it's streaming telemetry, put it in Influx, you figure it out. Here's how to build a dashboard, but not really working with the current systems. So the things that makes my friends who are streaming telemetry wingnuts the most unhappy is when I talk about consuming streaming telemetry and re-exposing it as SNMP. Because just the real world of our customers is there are a lot of systems, and Kentik isn't the one system that replaces everything. So really the idea is every way you want to instrument your device, not on the traffic side, but on the health side, and then feed it to all the systems, whether it's a modern net DevOpsy system like Influx or Kentik, or whether it's a traditional system. So if there's metrics that you need via CLI, again, have a toolkit that you could use to put it in MRTG. And then after that, much later, we're actually thinking about cloud flow logs, because a lot of our customers struggle with the cost of the cloud flow logs. They want the data. They're not buying a virtual MX or an Arista or something as a gateway. Not as much the Kentik side, but Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they charge you to generate flow logs, but this is stuff you can all get from host data. So whether it's our agent or SFlowD or IP tables, there's ways of getting visibility into the cloud, and that's something we also think about helping people with. So that's a little bit about where we are today and what our roadmap is. It's more data, more uses of it. And now I get to ask you all any kinds of things that you do operationally or your customers do if you work with clients that are drudgery and routine of network operations that you'd love to see the system like Kentik telling you, or workflows that would be helpful for automation. You can tell me now, or tweet it, or send us email. Those are all things that that's what we ask our customers.